let's talk a little bit about Agatha Christie's disappearance. So this is 1926. She'd been married to Colonel Christie for 12 years. She disappeared in 1926 for 11 days. And there's still some mystery surrounding this as to the reasons why she did and where she went and what actually happened to her. She didn't speak about it in her own autobiography, but she did speak about it to the newspaper 2 years after it happened. It gave rather a frank account, and I hope to convey some of that to you. But what she did was she had a massive argument with her husband, and what had happened on that morning, December 3rd, is he just wanted a divorce so he could go off with his mistress. And he said he was going to spend the weekend with his mistress and their friends. She was very angry, and she says, well, if you come back to this house, I won't be here when you come back, if you come back. And then she went into some kind of a fugue state. She explained it as a fugue state, and she stared for hours into space, just not understanding why this happened and why he's doing this to her. So her tradition was to kiss her daughter goodnight, leave her with the nanny, and she left a note there for her secretary that was coming in from London with instructions. And she also left a note for Archie. So there'll be 3 letters in this. Pay attention. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the young Agatha. Is she cute? Yeah. She's born on the 15th of December, 1890. And she has a lot of names. So it's Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller. And her mother's name is Clarissa. So she's kind of named after her. And then Mary was the grandmother. So to kind of incorporate all those names. She says she's had a happy childhood. Her father was one of these self-made men that was very comfortable. He was a financier, and he married her mother, Clara. His name was Frederick Alva Miller, and he was a financier from America, actually, New York. He had some business dealings over in Britain, and that's where he met Clarissa, her mother. And they had she had an unusual upbringing. So she had siblings that she had a brother and a sister. And the sister came first, and her name is Clarissa Margaret, and they called her Clara. So there's another Clarissa in there. She was born in 1879. And her brother, Monty, he was born in 1880. So if you notice, she is born in 1890. So there's like a 10-year gap in there. So her mother, Clarissa, thought that maybe Agatha should be a little more sheltered. She didn't want her to learn to read until she was 8 years old. But Agatha, being who she was, taught herself to read by the time she was 4 or 5. And the way they found out was her nanny went to go look for her, and she sees 2 legs hanging out of a tree. And she hears somebody sounding out words. And then it was up. They knew she could read. So her father did a lot of her homeschooling. The subjects that she learned were math and language, and she also learned to play the piano and the mandolin. So those were things that she was taught at home. And her siblings are quite a lot of years older, so it was a tradition to put them in boarding school. So young Agatha, there's not very many little kids around, so she's left on her own. So she makes up stuff. So she makes up imaginary friends, imaginary pets. She had some dogs, and then she would make up all these stories and lives about. That's where her imagination comes in, because she's trying to find something to do, she's bored, she's making up these stories, and the whole thing. So she's very imaginative, and she's left on her own a lot. She would make up plays and make the nanny perform with her for her mom and dad. And just very interesting that she learned all that. Eventually, when she was older, she got to go to the school in town, and she met a lot of little girlfriends, which she said was the highlight of her childhood, because now she's got friends. So now she and her friends make up plays and they do things together. So that it's a very good time for her. She's a very happy childhood. So she did learn the basic math, play the mandolin and the piano. So she was kind of very musically inclined. Her big sister, when she was home, kind of took her under her wing and kind of made her a little, I don't know, almost a doll of herself. And then she admired her brother Monty. He was the big brother, and he would include her in like swimming and doing things that weren't necessarily feminine at the time, but she learned how to hunt and shoot a gun and learned how to swim. She was a very strong swimmer. She enjoyed any time that she could go into the water, she would. And a lot of world travels and places that she went, she was able to get into the water. So, tragically, in 1901, her father passes away. He gets very ill with a chronic kidney disease, and he had a lung ailment, so he passes away. And she is the tender age of 11 years old. And she says that that was the end of her childhood. And, you know, it was heartbreaking because she was close, because those were the people, their mom, her dad, the nanny, you know, that was her whole structure. And she really admired her dad and looked up to him. So she says that it was tragic for her. So in 1902, she started to attend Miss Geyer's girls' school in Torquay. So it's all girl students, it's her friends. She's going into town. She's getting to see a little more town life than where she's off on the estate. And she loves it, except for she has a little trouble buckling down with the kind of discipline that school takes. Okay, she's used to unscheduled, unbridled, let's go out and have fun, I'm gonna do what I want. And then when she goes to school, there's this little, a little bump in the road where she doesn't want to follow that schedule because she's just not used to it. It's just not something she's ever done. And she, you know, has a little trouble with that. Nothing outrageous, because she's not going to make a scene, but she just didn't like that they were on schedule there. And finally, in 1905, she was sent to a boarding school in Paris to finish, I guess, several boarding schools where she focused on voice training and playing the piano. Now, one of the teachers was really close with her and tried to teach her some opera. And young Christie's trying very hard. She has a very nice voice, but she's just not quite hitting that range. And, you know, he wants to be very delicate, and she's like, well, I guess my dream profession of playing the piano and opera singing is out. I'm going to have to find something else I can do. So it was a learning curve for her. So after her education, she went with her mother. A lot of well-to-do families did, and her mother had a lung ailment at the time. So she went to Egypt to recover for the summer. So then that dry air would help with the lungs and whatever. And she went there, she got to see the Great Pyramid and some artifacts and things. But at that time, she wasn't very interested in archaeology or seeing the sights. She was more interested in going to dances and socializing with boys. So that was her focus then, and it's not to say that later on it's not going to change a little. All right, now we get to Agatha meets Colonel Christie. So Agatha's social activities expanded when she came home from finishing school, and she's back in Torquay, and she goes to house parties. She also takes up riding horses, and she goes on hunting parties and dances and roller skating. So she's very active, very physically active, likes sports, likes adventure, just likes doing things, moving around, doing stuff. So at the time, she had some short-lived relationships. She had one engagement, and that was kind of a strange agreement with the man. He was kind of like, if I come back in a year and you're not married, will you marry me? So that's kind of a half lukewarm proposal. Now what she wanted was romance and excitement, she wanted the love affair. Just, because of her active imagination, she's very emotional, and she had this great idea in the knight in shining armor and so forth. So in October 1912, she was introduced to Archibald Christie at a dance. And what he did was, they had those dance cards back then, right? So he took her dance card, wiped everybody off, and just wrote his name so he could dance with her all night. Kind of romantic, right? Yes? Yeah. Kind of. It's a gesture. It's a good one. And so Archie ends up proposing to her after only 3 months. But they wait a little while. Now, Agatha's mother had a little misgivings about this. For some reason, she just, he put her off a little. He's in a hurry to get married, whatever. So she kind of just had this little funny feeling about Archie. Mother's tuition? I don't know. So Archie was actually part of the Air Force, the Air Corps, and it wasn't exactly what she was hoping for, but guy in uniform and everything. And then in August 1914, of course, World War I breaks out, and he's going to go off to France and fly. And when he comes back, they get married on Christmas Eve, and they have one night honeymoon, and he's back at it. So, but Agatha did not sit around during the war. She started as a nurse volunteer at the hospital. And then she started to work as a dispenser for medications. And back then, the thing in England was to call them poison, which, great. For some reason, when they mixed the formula, it was just their protocol to call it poison, which comes in, interestingly, later in her writing career. And then finally, she gets a really good paying job being apothecary's assistant, which she knew how to mix those medications, because this is before, things were factory made and put in capsules and whatever. They had to be very precise in mixing that stuff because you could poison them, but that's a lot of the basis of her novels, of course, when the person gets bumped off, that usually the method's poison, but we know that. So, a lot of activities and things started happening, and the Christies started having some excitement. So the war ends, and Mr. Christie, he comes home. He gets a job as a financier in London, and they have a daughter. Now, the war's over, so Agatha's jobs are done. She settles into being a housewife. She likes to be a housewife. Well, her sister challenges her to write a detective story. I bet you can't do that. But you can't write a good detective story. Agatha goes, I'll take you up on that. And so she writes a detective story. It's a short story that she had hoped would get serialized in the magazines. That's all she was hoping for. But then she ran into a publisher, and then her first novel was The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Now, when they bought their big estate, Archie and Agatha, they nicknamed it Styles, so it's kind of funny that she worked then in there. So that's 1920, and her first book gets published, and then she's under contract to write 5 more. So this is her first contract. She goes in and the publisher just hands her this contract, but she's so like starstruck that this guy wants my writing and whatever, and she didn't really read it as carefully as maybe she should have because she's so excited, and he wants 5 more books. So that comes in handy later when she decides to renegotiate. But at the time, hey, it's great. Everything's going great. He liked my stories, and I'm going to do some more. So an exciting thing happens to them in 1922. So, got 1919, the war ends, Archie gets his job. They can afford a little flat in London then. Rosalind, their daughter, is born. Serious Affair at Styles is published with the 5 more books. And then in 1924, England had this exhibition. It was the whole British Empire. And what had happened is Archie made friends with the major that was in charge of it, and what they did was they took their own money so Agatha could come along. And it was a tour of all the British territories and things that they owned. So they were using their own money for that. Archie was paid for, and they just had a great time. It was like 9 months of fun. They went everywhere. They did all kinds of things. And Rosalind stayed home with Agatha's sister and mother. And where they went, it's Major Ernest Belcher. Now this guy, he could talk a good game, and he was in charge of potatoes or some strange thing. The potato supply during the war. Talked his way into it, and it was just, anyway, feed the troops on potatoes, whatever. So he talks his way into this exhibition, and then he talks Archie into going with him, and he talks a good game. So when they get going, they end up going to South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and Canada. So the first part of the trip, Agatha had miserable seasickness. She was just, ugh. And she can't eat anything, and the sea is roiling, and she's like, just drop me off at the first island. I'll become a lady's maid. They like tall ladies' maids, because Agatha at 5'7", she's just begging him to get off this boat, and I'll do anything. Just leave me here, just keep going, and I'll just stay here because, well, eventually her seasickness went away, but she always carried her typewriter along with her in case there was ideas, and she would write things everywhere, notebooks, notepads, whatever. She'd get an idea in her head, she'd write it down, and then she had the typewriter. So when there were down times when Archie was busy promoting this thing, she would be in the hotel room or whatever, writing, or in her cabin, and that's just what she did. But they had an exciting time. She really loved South Africa, and they actually, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's rumored that they are the first 2 British citizens to surf standing upright. Because before they would just ride, kind of sitting. That's a rumor. I don't have a confirmation for that. But anyway, lots of outdoor activities, lots of great things. They're promoting England. It's great. It's like this great traveling, until they start to run out of money for Agatha. So Agatha, when they were in Canada, they're kind of running out of money, and she has family in New York. Actually, her brother was born in New York because her father's from New York. So what she had decided is she would go to New York and visit family, and then Archie decided, well, he better end his part of the trip too and go with her. So they kind of ran out of money because they were using their own money for her. So they really didn't make it all the way to all the countries. And then a very tragic thing happens in April of 1926. Now, Agatha Christie's mother, Clarissa, dies. They were exceptionally close. Now that's her only parent she still has. She spends 6 months cleaning out that house, the estate, trying to get the affairs in order. She thought it would take a couple months. And Archie, who does not like unhappiness or illness. He only came once or twice to visit with her. Now at this time, she has insomnia. She's not eating. She is just getting this overwhelming depression. And Archie doesn't deal with these things. He doesn't like unhappiness. He doesn't like illness. He doesn't even go to her mother's funeral. Yeah. Oh, that Archie. But what he was doing was he was visiting his club. Now, before her mother died, she and Archie had taken up the game of golf. Now, she was fair at it, but she wasn't too interested, because she does like activities and things and sports and riding horses and all the things she likes. So golf is okay, but she's not really into it. But Archie becomes obsessed with golf. All of his off time from work is golf. After work, it's golf. Sometimes he stays the night over at his golf club. Sometimes he'll stay there several nights, but he came once to see how she was doing, and he wanted her to go with him to some spa thing. But when he saw her and she was gaunt and sickly, he didn't know what to say to her. And the thing that he blurts out of his mouth is, "I'm having an affair with Nancy Neal. I want a divorce." Well, this, coupled with all the things that she had just been through, was just major for her. So she was, I'll go back to the cleaning out the Styles home. So Agatha Christie's mom dies. She's left a lot of times at home. That is their state Ashfield, it's called. And on top of all that, she develops severe writer's block. She is contracted to write these novels, but she cannot, because she's devastated, and then this whole strain on the relationship, and he can't handle it, and blah, and he's seeing this woman and whatever. So he has no tolerance for it, sadness, illness, whatever. But Agatha wants that marriage to work. She says, "Give me 3 months. Give us 3 months. We can get together. We can save this marriage," because she wanted her daughter to have a dad. So here is golf, and here is good old Nancy. So Archie agreed to give the 3 months to save their marriage, but he didn't show up half the time, to things that they had booked or hotels or whatever. Just, I don't know, wasn't very interested. And when they were together, it was just like very businesslike, no emotion, no nothing. But the more she tried to get emotional, the more he backed off. But she really wanted to save it. But Archie became obsessed with golf, and also the other woman, who was 10 years younger than Agatha. Oh man, Archie. And her name was Nancy Neal, and that will come in later. After all that, there were reports in the village that she'd had a little nervous breakdown after her mother had passed. So, let's get to the disappearance. So, on the morning of December 3rd, 1926, Archie is back at home with her, and he says he wants a divorce. Well, she is angry, and of course the maid's overhearing this, that they are arguing, and she is arguing, and she is angry at this point. She says, "You gave me 3 months, you didn't show up half the time, you're not even trying to contribute here." And then he's like, "Oh, just don't get emotional. I'm going to spend the weekend, at my club," which means with Nancy and their friends, I'm going to spend the weekend there. And I want a divorce, and, So he announces those plans, and he drives off. At this point, it's getting dark. Well, Agatha is in what she called a fugue state, where she's just kind of sitting there. She's staring off into space because of the shock and the anguish and the just terrible things. So her routine was to kiss her daughter goodnight. She leaves a note for the maid. She leaves a note for Archie in which her wedding rings are in. And she loves this Morris Crowley Roadster car. She loves it. She loves driving it. It's exciting for her. She just loves that car. She'll go off on a run with her car. So that's what's written in the note to the maid, or the secretary. It's written, I've gone for a run in my car, and I'll telegram you when I get to where I'm going. So with all those things going on, what happens on the 4th? Now, bear in mind that this is going to be a phenomenal story in the newspapers. This is going to be sensational. You got popular author, you got the war hero, colonel, the wife of, and they're going to latch onto that. And the stories will start flying, the rumors will start flying. Some of it's substantiated, some is not. So, I'm going to read you an example of, first I'll tell you what one of the eyewitnesses had to say. And his name was Frederick Dorr, and he's the one that found the car. And he found it abandoned in a place called Newlands Corners on Saturday morning. And what he found inside was a fur coat, a case, some clothing, an expired driver's license that says Agatha Christie on it. It's all in the car, right? And what he found was, now, some say a chalk pit, some say a gravel pit, but what he found was that the car, the wheels and part of the front was hanging over this pit, this gravel pit, chalk pit, which is an argument, but I would say gravel pit. That's what I'm used to. But anyway, that the brakes were not applied. So that means nobody slammed on the brakes. So whoever was in that accident in that car had no intention of stopping, okay? Because no brakes, it was in neutral. The running board and part of the carriage and the wheels were also stuck under a bush, so maybe the bush prevented that car from going completely over. And it looked like the lights had been left on and then eventually extinguished because the battery ended up, going out. So that's what he found. And no brakes were applied. Interesting, right? So it's like the car crash. So a more interesting graphic kind of description was provided by the Harrogate Advisors, which is another newspaper. It says, near a chalk pit, a few hundred yards from Newlands Corner, which was one of the numerous gravel pits that was around there, the car appeared as though it had run down from the corner with the brakes off, and gathering speed had swerved off into the thick hedge and became lodged with the front wheels hanging over. So that's his eyewitness account. So things start going crazy, right? This lady's missing. She's gone, girl, she's gone. Nobody knows where she is. So the newspaper's going crazy, the police are going crazy, they're just looking for her anyway. Any place, anytime. They're looking that whole Newlands Corner, they're going through the fields. There's a pond there called the Silent Pool, and they start looking in there with sticks to see, if her body's in there, because the police think it's a suicide, which it could be. And so they said also, they found these strange clues when we were looking around, and there's a little hunting bungalow off in the woods. And what they find in there is a bottle labeled poison, lead, opium, and some fragments of a torn up postcard, some children's book, a box of face powder, a fur-lined coat, and this is all in this hunting bungalow. So they think that maybe she went there. So there's wild speculation going on. And they find some tracks and another fur coat out there. And where is she? We can't find her. And Colonel Christie, of course, believes that she is still alive. He's still saying to people he doesn't like the press. He's kind of standoffish with that. Kind of gives abrupt answers, but he says there's no way. My wife committed suicide. She's still alive. We'll probably find her in London. She probably just went off driving in her car to London. So the police had given a description of Agatha and was carried in the newspaper. So height, 5'7", hair reddish and shingled, which is a type of haircut. Eyes gray, complexion fair, well built, dressed in gray stockinette skirt, green jumper, gray and dark gray cardigan, and a small green velvet hat. So that is their description of her. Is think well built. Okay. Now, we're going to get airplanes. We are going to get people. We are going to get Mrs. Christie's dog. With the hopes that her little wire hair terrier can smell her out and find her. So they're unconvinced because the secretary comes up with that letter that said, you know, the weekend plans were canceled and she's going to telegram me, but the maid didn't think it was important. The secretary didn't think it was important about this note because it's ordinary, you know, she's canceling plans, she's going for a run in her car. So they decided to bring this poor dog out, and his name's Peter. And so they bring him out and he's sniffing along, but all he does is whine. Like, he doesn't know what they want, you know, he's not a bloodhound. Come on, this poor dog. And there's all these people around and whatever, and that poor dog is scared, you know. So all he does is whine, well, I would too, if there's all these people around and whatever, and you don't know what he wants, and his mama's missing. His mama is missing, you know. So they had 500 police, 2 planes, start looking. Lots of things. They say that this is the first time they used airplanes to search for a person, but that's not confirmed. So a lot of speculation in the press, imagine that this is a publicity stunt. She's pulling off this mystery to sell more books. Get her name in the paper. She's a little known author. She got a book out there, you know. She's doing it for publicity. So that's out there. Because you know how the press gets, and they're just going to jump at anything that they think, any theories that they have. But there's another witness, and his name is Edward McAllister. And he told the police on Monday night that he had helped a lady motorist to start her car near Newlands Corners on Saturday morning. So he made a statement on the subject, and he said that about 400 yards from the top of Newlands Corner and on the road leading over Morrow Downs, he saw a gray car. The radiator was quite cold. The woman had no coat or hat on and was wearing a gray jumper. And after some time, he got her car started, and the woman drove away very slowly down the hill and away from Newlands Corner. So he says if that was the car and the woman that he had helped, she must have turned around where he didn't see her, and then he went off to work. So if that was her, he's claiming he helped her. Maybe. But important to note, it was very cold. She didn't have a hat. She didn't have a coat. The car battery or whatever was run down. He had to crank it up. So, third letter. This third letter was written to her brother-in-law and arrived at his workplace. And she had written to him and explains her disappearance, that she was going to a spa to recuperate from being so ill and her mother's death and those things, for a little rest and treatment. So the case is closed, right? She writes the letter, goes to the brother-in-law. She must be in Yorkshire. She must be at the spa, but not quite. So Agatha Christie's secretary had received that note on the 4th. told her the weekend plans were canceled. She also wrote that she was going for a run in her car, which was something that she did. Sometimes she'd just drive off in her car. I like to do that. And she would telegram to say where she would end up. But Deputy Chief Constable Kenward of Surrey was convinced that the answer would be found at Newland Corner. Now, this constable fellow, he was very interested in getting some publicity of his own because he had solved a case a little earlier and he kind of got a little taste for being important. And I'm on the case. I believe this theory that she is somewhere there and the answer's Newland's Corner. And so he kind of fed into the story himself because he wanted to be part of the story. So that kind of happens. So the secretary thought that this note wasn't important at all. She shouldn't show it to the police. Nothing too important about it. In the meantime, she had noticed that there was that note that was left for Archie with the wedding rings in it. So Archie, she gives the note to him, and he turns his back like this. And he opens it up, and the wedding rings fall out, and he reads that note, but she can't see it because he's got the back turned. And he takes that note, and he rips it up and throws it in the fireplace. A little suspicious, maybe? Throws it in the fireplace. He says, "There's nothing important, nothing to see here," right? He also comes out with his statement to the press, and he says, "It's absolutely untrue to suggest that there was anything in the manner of a row or tiff between my wife and myself on Friday morning," which was December 3rd, "and she was perfectly well. That is to say, as well as she had been for months past. She knew I was going away for the weekend. She knew who we were going to be with the members of the party, which I was going to stay, and neither then nor at any time did she raise the slightest objection." Really? It's not what the maid said. No. Well, maybe Archie's trying to cover his tracks a little bit. But it's kind of suspicious that when he opens that note, the wedding rings roll out. He turns his back, she can't see it, tears it up, throws it in the fireplace. So we don't know what that note ever said. Seems a little fishy, I don't know, maybe. All right, then, you know how rumors just fly, fly, fly. So many search parties are organized. There's two of them, one goes one way, one goes another. They have volunteers come and look. The Times actually suggests that she's in disguise in London dressed as a man. Now, although Agatha is sporty, she is very feminine. She wouldn't even think about it, you know. So the police are asking Archie to search his closets to see if he's missing any clothes. It's just like all this stuff going on. So, was it foul play? Did somebody kill her? And, you know, or was it a publicity stunt? Or was there something to do with that accident? Could she have hit her head on the steering wheel or something? You know, there's three things going on, possibilities, and plus this dress like a man, and all the things that the press can come up with, right? Not like, you know, there's an aimless speculation about things in the paper, you know, on the news, on the 24/7 news cycle. Not like we do that today because we're so sophisticated. So, it's estimated that 10,000 to 15,000 people were taking part in that search. They had 6 trained bloodhounds, a crate load of Arundel Terriers, many retrievers, and Australian police dogs, and even common mongrels. I love that. Those poor dogs. You're common mongrels. Anyway. So rumors began flying that she left behind a sealed envelope that was only to be opened if they found her dead body. These are rumors. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he invited his psychic, because he was very into spiritualism at the time and psychics and those kind of things. So he invited his psychic over to kind of help in the search. The psychic said that she knew that she was alive but couldn't tell where she was at. And then, of course, other psychics are saying that she met with foul play. So what are you going to do? Hooray! She is found. So she is found at the hydro, and her memory is gone. But the interesting thing about her registration is she registers herself as Teresa Nile from South Africa. That's what she registered. Now, I recognize that surname a little bit. So she comes in, the staff is a little, they have something funky about her because she comes in with hardly any luggage, no suitcase, nothing but herself, and she books this room. And then later on, she goes out shopping, she makes friends with people, and she's really convinced that she is this Mrs. Nile. And she'll go shopping in town, she bought herself some clothes. The one lady she made friends with, they go into the bookstore, and then she's seeing all these newspapers while she's there with Agatha Christie missing. And they go, you know, you kind of look like her. And she goes, huh, yeah, and goes and does the crossword puzzle. Because she liked crossword puzzles. She's like, oh yeah, okay. Not, you know, recognizing herself. She just goes about the crossword puzzle. So they're in town, they're shopping in the bookstore. She sees this book, and it's The Mysterious Affair at Styles. And she goes, oh, this Agatha Christie. She's all over the newspaper stuff. I'll buy the book. And then she buys a bunch of other mystery books and puzzles and whatever, and then she goes back to her hotel. So she's always reading and whatever, but she bought her own book and without, presumably, not recognizing that was her, that she was in the newspapers. At first, when she's at the hotel, she keeps with herself. She says, and other witnesses say, that she did have bruised forehead, and she says herself that her chest was bruised. Like, if you think possibly maybe she had hit her head and hit on the steering wheel, right? But of course, they don't know about the chest thing. She just says that, but they definitely see something going on with her head. But then she makes friends at the hotel. She's there for the spa thing. Now, she had always had sciatica, you know, and it was a problem. So she and Archie had actually talked about going here so she could go into mineral waters and whatever and take care of that sciatica. So she ends up there. So, and we'll find out more her own story. So she has complete memory loss, according to Archie, and also two doctors that had examined her. And she had a little picture of her daughter, Rosalind, but her nickname was Teddy because they said she was soft and cuddly like a teddy bear. So on the back of this picture now, this is Rosalind as a baby, and you know, a lot of times girl babies don't have a lot of hair, babies just don't have a lot of hair, right? So on the back of that photograph is written Teddy. So in her mind, she's a widow from South Africa, and she has a son named Teddy because that's the evidence she had with her. So she's thinking this, and she's thinking she's a widow lady, and she doesn't know what happened to her son. So she thinks she's Mrs. Nile. So Colonel Christie's not real sure where she got the money to book the spa and where she got the money for the clothing, because, you know, money for a spa is a lot of money. And, you know, she usually only carried like, I don't know, 5-10 pounds in her purse, just not a whole lot of money because, you know. So she had actually taken out an advertisement to have her relatives of Mrs. Nile to contact her, you know, at the P.O. box in London because she wanted to find out, where are my relatives? What am I doing here? I'm not real sure what I'm doing here, how I got here. So hopefully, if they had seen the advertisement as ad in the newspaper, that they'd come and find her, and then mystery solved. Where's my son? My son Teddy. So she was visited at the Harrogate by 2 doctors, confirmed that they believe that the way she was acting was compatible with memory loss. And what they did was, so they thought that the Christies would come through London. So you get the picture there, thousands of people coming to King Cross because they think they're going from that Harrogate to there. So what they did was they got 2 people in the hotel that were kind of lookalikes, and they had them go out the front door and go. And they snuck out the back door. So they didn't have the people following. Pretty smart, right? So it was Archie, Agatha's sister, and sister's husband. And they went off into the countryside to Agatha's sister's house where they wouldn't answer the door or whatever when they finally figured out what had happened and where they went. All right. So the Times reported that she was Mrs. Teresa Nile, and Colonel Christie insists that he has no idea what that name is and where it came from. He said he doesn't know any Niles, doesn't know why Agatha used that as a surname, no idea. But of course, years later, it was revealed that, that's the mistress's last name. That's Nancy Nile's last name, but he's claiming, hey, I don't know where that name came from. I just don't know. All right, so 1928. Agatha gives a full and frank account to the Daily Mail. This is one interview she has, okay? And it's what she can remember. So her mother's death, in the spring of 26, it affected her very deeply, along with the shock of private troubles, as she says. Private troubles? What are they? Archie's affair. So she became an insomniac. She was only sleeping 2 hours a night. She ate less and less. She became confused. And she struggled to remember what she was doing. And she says unhappiness, worry, and overwork took a toll on her both mentally and physically. And her secretary confirmed that Agatha had not recovered from a serious breakdown the year before. So she's got a lot of trouble. I'm going to read a little bit about what she told them. So she says, that night I felt terribly miserable, and I felt that I could not go on any longer. I left home that night in a state of high nervous strain and the intention of doing something desperate. I left home at 10 o'clock in my car with a few articles of clothing in a suitcase and about 60 pounds in my bag. I had drawn some of the money from the bank shortly before, as I had decided to go that winter to South Africa with my daughter. So this is where she got the money. This is where she got South Africa from. And she was really happy when they went on the expedition in South Africa. That was her happiest time. It was a good time. So she wanted to go back there and take her daughter. So she's making the preparations, but she's got 60 pounds in her purse. So all the night, she had drove aimlessly about, and in my mind, there was the vague idea of ending everything. I drove automatically down roads I knew, but without thinking where I was going. As far as I remember, I went to London, and I drove to the train station, and why I went there, I do not know. And I believe then I drove to Maidenhead, where I looked at the river, and I thought about jumping in, but realized that I'm a really strong swimmer. Oops. That plan's not going to work. I then drove back to London again, and then on to Sunningdale. From there, I went to Newlands Corner, and when I reached a point on the road, which I had thought was near the quarry I had seen in the afternoon, I turned the car off, and I turned down the road, down the hill, and I left the steering wheel. I let go of the steering wheel, and I let the car run. The car struck something with a jerk, and I pulled up suddenly, and I was flung against the steering wheel, and my head hit something. Up to this moment, I was Mrs. Christie. I was certainly in an abnormal state of mind, and scarcely knew what I was doing or where I was going. All the same, I knew I was Mrs. Christie. But after that accident in the car, however, I lost my memory for 24 hours after the accident, and my mind was an almost complete blank. Since I recovered my health, I have managed to recall a little of what happened in those 24 hours. So that's what she thinks. So she starts rambling on in this interview, and her story is kind of out of sync. You know, she's telling one part of the story, another part of the story, but it's kind of like disconnected and kind of disjointed when she's giving this interview. So she says she remembers arriving at a big railroad station and asking what it was and being surprised to learn it was Waterloo, or where it was Waterloo. It is strange that the railroad authorities there did not recall me, as I was covered in mud and I had smeared blood on my face and a cut from my hand, but they thought it was okay. Sold her a ticket. This is fine. Woman, middle of the night, you know, just muddy and bloody, but that's okay, you know. Let's go ahead and sell her a ticket. She got money. But she had had some of those signs that an accident had occurred when she arrives there, but no big deal. So I'm going to read you a brief definition of something from the National Library of Medicine, which might be something that was going on in this case. So they are calling it psychogenetic amnesia, and it's something that starts suddenly. And patients are unable to recall long periods of their lives and sometimes deny any knowledge of a previous life or personal identity. So when this fugue state happens, in which a person loses the awareness of their own identity, the patient not only loses his or her memory, but also wanders away from his usual surrounding. When found, he usually denies all memory of his whereabouts during the period of the wandering and may also deny knowledge of his personal identity. So fugues also occur in epilepsy, severe depressive disorders, and alcoholism. One of those things might apply, right? Severe depression, possibly. They may also be associated with suicide attempts. Okay. And many patients present in the fugue give a history of seriously disturbed relationships with their parents in childhood, and many others are habitual liars. And it should be emphasized here that there's no suggestion that Agatha Christie was a liar. She wrote stories. Yeah. Lots of fiction. But, so, some theories think that because of all the emotional trauma, the trauma of the accident, that this could cause that fugue state. And she definitely wandered off. She registered as another person. Now, either she's doing it as a publicity stunt, or she's trying to enact some kind of revenge against Archie, like setting him up, like maybe he bumped her off, because, you know, she writes those books. So she says, of course, she knew that many people thought she had gone away to seek publicity and to carry out a stupid hoax. Now, what she means by stupid hoax, or to have a subtle revenge on somebody. Wonder who that is. And on the day of the disappearance, she took her daughter to see her mother-in-law, hoping that Archie's mother might know if there was any way or hope to save that marriage. So she goes to her mother-in-law. They have tea. She's trying to get some answers from the mother-in-law. You know, is Archie really serious about this? But the mother-in-law just wants to straight up have tea. She's just talking like everything's normal. Every time Agatha tries to broach the subject, she just changes it. So she's just having tea, and we're having food, and we're just having a normal conversation. So, as she drove past Newland's Corner in the afternoon, she saw a quarry and thought that she wanted her life to end, and she thought about driving into it, but Rosalind was in the car, so she decided not to. So where does her car end up later? Now, this is her account, the one interview she did give. Okay? So not even in her autobiography did she say anything about this subject. The only thing she said that it was much sadness and we'll move on, basically. So she realized then there was no hope of reconciliation at this point. She had seen the doctors, she had seen psychologists, and she realizes that, Archie's not coming back. So she sues for divorce. And she decided at that point, I'm going to be the professional writer. I am going to support myself and my daughter, and bye-bye, Archie. See ya. So she was later on asked by her secretary, they're really close, and she goes, Mrs. Christie, would you get married again? And she goes, well, no one can hurt you like a husband, so no. So I'm not going to leave you too sad on this story, because guess what? Agatha goes on. And where does she go? Orient Express. Yeah. Sound familiar, right? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So in her autobiography, she says, so after illness came sorrow, despair, and heartbreak, and there is no need to dwell on it. So the whole Archie thing, that's it. Her autobiography, that is it. That's all you're getting. So in 1928, she left England, and she took the Orient Express to Istanbul and to Baghdad, and she became friends with an archaeologist whose name was Leonard Woolley and his wife. Okay. And they invited her to return back to the dig that they were on. And on her second trip, she met archaeologist Max Mallowan. But he's 13 years younger than her. Amazing, right? So, second marriage. Kind of cute there, right? Kind of nice. So when she met him, he was a prominent archaeologist, 13 years her junior. And in February 1930, little did she know it would be a result of a whirlwind romance. Just what she wanted, right? And a marriage just 7 months later. So after the trauma of her divorce, she left England on the trip to Orient Express, and she met the other archaeologist, and they were friends with him. So she went on a tour with him and to the dig, and during the February trip, she met him, and then they were at a dig in an ancient city in in Mesopotamia. And he was taking these parties on guided tours of the site, and he reportedly feared that Agatha would be repulsed by his job of digging up ancient remains. Okay. That she's going to be repulsed that he digs up ancient remains? No! Come on, what does she write? She's fine. Right. So on the contrary, she was fascinated by the archaeology, and meeting him reawakened her interest in life and writing again, and they married in Edinburgh, and they lived happily together. And while she was married to him, she was married up until her death in 1976 to him, she went on to write some of her most famous successful novels. including Murder on the Orient Express, 1934, Death on the Nile, 1937, An Appointment with Death, 1938. Man, she's just banging them out. She became the prolific writer we remember today, spending her spare time going on the digs in Iraq with her husband. So see, I can't leave you hanging. It has a happy ending. So let's look a little bit at what Agatha accomplished. She's known for 66 detective novels and 14 short story collections. She also wrote the longest running play. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records. It's called The Mousetrap. It is being performed in the West End Theatre in London, and it has been since 1952. You know, she was a writer during the golden age of detective fiction, and she's known as the Queen of Crime, or the Dame of Danger. 1971, of course, she's made a dame, but this is after her husband became a Sir for his archaeology. So, and then she right after. And of course, Queen Elizabeth II, you know, for her contributions to literature. So, she's listed as the best-selling fiction writer of all time, and her novels having sold more than 2 billion copies. Crazy, right? So I couldn't leave you sad, because it does have a happy ending. And here are all the works I cited. I did upload those to our website under the programming, so there's a document, so if you want to look these things up for yourself. And here's lovely Agatha, surrounded by her 66 books.
What happened to your daughter during all this?
Her daughter was just fine. A lot of times she was under the care of the aunt. Something that's interesting, though, is Agatha had that active imagination, and she was hoping her daughter would be the same. And then her daughter was more like Archie, very straight to the point, didn't understand this nonsense. And so she was kind of a little disappointed there. And then they did have bad feelings here and there, because when Rosalind also married an Air Force colonel, she didn't want to tell Agatha that she was getting married. But she found out. And the sad bit is that Rosalind's husband gets killed, and so she's a widow, but she did have a grandson for Agatha, and the grandson's more like Agatha, and they could tell stories and stuff together. So actually Agatha gave the grandson the rights to the play before she passed. He is in charge of the estate now. So he had put out a book a few years ago about the English expedition, where it has photographs from there and things, because she always wrote to her mother, and it has the letters that she had written to her mother and the photographs, and they are spectacular, and it tells all the things they did and all the adventures, because she's always writing to her mother, because they were close. So she did end up getting along with the daughter. It's just that they didn't see eye to eye, because Agatha wanted to make everything knights in shining armor and fun and silly and whatever, and the other one's like, what are you doing? Ma, what are you doing? Okay, so that is it. Thank you for coming. I hope this gives you a little insight to a little incident that happened. I do think it's kind of ironic that she made herself disappear, but that kind of goes along with her novels, so.